Welcome everybody to this week's surveillance report covering the truth about password managers and how concerned you should be in light of some potential attack vectors. Google's threat to the open Android ecosystem, Apple's global age verification has begun to roll out, Android mental health applications packed with security flaws, and a massive week of breaches and service updates, including an unexpected one from Samsung. Welcome to the Techlore Surveillance Report, your essential weekly tech news, delivering deep analysis on the latest threats to security, privacy, and digital freedom, empowering you to reclaim control and defend your rights. Right before we get into the password manager story, just a quick announcement. There will be no surveillance report next week. I apologize in advance. We have quite a few things happening back here, and so next week we will have to skip, but you will get the amazing double week after that. So I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's dive into this juicy story, which regards password managers. So I think Ars overall did the best coverage for this. There were quite a lot of stories, and they tried to avoid getting into the details as it is quite technical. So I'm going to do my best to try to consolidate the information and make this as actionable as I can, given the technical nature of it all. But pretty much this has to do with password managers. And there were some researchers who analyzed the security of many password managers, including ones like LastPass, Dashlane, Bitwarden. Those were the three that they cited the most often, but they did specifically say that some of these attacks seem like they would also work with services like 1Password and other services they didn't really choose to come forward with. So this doesn't cover ProtonPass, it doesn't cover insert other password manager, but I think it's safe to assume that the overall attack vectors can probably be replicated on many password managers. Now I'm going to dive a little bit more into these, but just to kind of set the stage, what can happen is an attacker can target Bitwarden and LastPass as well as other password managers, which would allow this insider to read or write to the contents of an entire vault. In some cases, they exploit weaknesses in the key escrow mechanisms that allow users to regain access to their accounts when they lose their master password. Others exploit weaknesses in support for legacy versions of the password manager. A vault theft attack against Dashlane allowed reading but not modification of vault items when they were shared with other users. So I'm going to dive into each of these individually. So the first one targets Bitwarden key escrow, which is done via the enrollment of a new member of a family or an organization. So if you use Bitwarden and you're trying to share things via like a group admin invite, etc., what happens there is that the person you're sending that link to, they are going to be accessing the server and obtaining a group symmetric key and the group's public key. The client then encrypts that key with the group public key and sends it back to the server. And the resulting ciphertext is what's used to recover the new user's account. The data is never integrity checked when it's sent from the server to the client during an account enrollment session. Because of this architecture and the fact they don't actually verify this can be exploited by replacing the group public key with one from a key pair created by the adversary. And since the adversary knows the corresponding private key, it can be used to decrypt the ciphertext and then perform an account recovery on behalf of the targeted user. So that was issue one. There was a second attack though that targeted Bitwarden account recovery, and it can be performed when a user rotates vault keys, which is actually an option that Bitwarden directly recommends if they think that your master password's been compromised. So when account recovery is on, which is either manual or automatic, the user client will regenerate the recovery ciphertext, which as described earlier involves obtaining this new public key that's encrypted with the organization public key. So it's during all of these actions that theoretically an adversary could try to intercept them and essentially take control of various things inside of your vault. One very interesting thing as well is that another avenue that the attackers can do is that they can target backwards compatibility of the various password managers. They specifically really target those three, which are Dashlane, LastPass, and Bitwarden. But the goal here is to pretty much utilize older, less secure versions of the software. Since all three password managers continue to support the versions without the newer security improvements, the backward compatibility is actually a deliberate decision intended to prevent users who haven't upgraded from losing access to their vaults, which can be abused by these attackers. Another thing they attack is something called malleability. Pretty much, instead of encrypting a vault in a single blob, kind of like what you might picture with a KeyPass database, password managers often encrypt individual items and sometimes individual fields within an item. And because these are all encrypted with the same key, the attacks exploit this design to steal passwords from select vault items. Now, if you're watching the video, there is a chart that is here on the screen that you can see. It pretty much covers all the various attacks the causes, the impacts, the interactions, as well as the mitigations. Now, this is part of the full research paper, which I'm also leaving linked in the show notes if any of you are far more technical than I am and want to read the full thing. It is incredibly technical and seems quite balanced. And so if you do want to learn a little bit more, I do encourage you all to read that primary source. Again, that's linked in the show notes. I do want to stress that the Ars Technica coverage is, in my opinion, the best one I found, but not even Ars covered really everything inside of this research paper. These researchers were quite thorough. So this is not just what I listed is just kind of a sneak peek, but there's actually a lot more things that you guys should read into here. So there's many things here. There's the key escrow abuse, there's the vault/item malleability, there's the downgrade of the software, and actually what really came up here before I really talk about who this impacts, what to do, they talk about the whole claim of zero knowledge a lot in this article, and this is not something I've really heard about before, but I learned some very fascinating things here. There used to be a company called SpiderOak. I have heard of them. They used to have a password manager that they randomly discontinued, which was quite unfortunate because I actually migrated some of my family to using them, and then I don't think they trust me ever again to use a password manager after they had to migrate back away from them. But the whole term zero knowledge, which is something that is used a lot by myself inside of our community, many privacy and security services use this term zero knowledge, typically interchangeably with end-to-end encryption. But it's actually not a very established term. SpiderOak is the original person who started describing it as zero knowledge back in 2007. But actually, they retired the term a decade later after a lot of user pushback. Now, the researchers from this paper that I covered today said it is just marketing hype, much like military-grade encryption. Zero knowledge seems to mean different things to different people. LastPass told us they won't adopt a malicious server threat model internally. Much unlike end-to-end encryption, zero knowledge encryption is an elusive goal, so it's impossible to tell if a company is doing it right. And because it has no formal definition, it seems like companies are pretty quick to defend their marketing around the term zero knowledge. So going forward in our content, I want to be a little bit more cognizant of that and try to give you all a little bit better understanding of what zero knowledge means in the context of a specific provider. Okay, so Henry, what does this mean for me? Should I ditch my password manager? What's going on here? This sounds really scary. First, I do want to be clear. These are very hard to pull off, but they're not impossible. The researchers actually acknowledge that the full compromise of a password manager server is a high bar, because that's what all of these things depend on. They depend on the entire server of one of these password managers getting compromised. But they do still defend that as a reasonable assumption that could potentially happen. They talk about how sophisticated nation-state level adversaries could try to do this, and they even cite the LastPass data breach where LastPass was legitimately hacked. And they said, while none of the breaches we are aware of involved reprogramming the server to make it undertake malicious actions, this goes just one step beyond attacks on password manager service providers that have already happened and are documented. Active attacks more broadly have been documented in the wild. And that's pretty much what they talk about. They say how the client is built very defensively. What they mean by that is the client is very secure. The thing that you're installing on your phone, that is where all the time and attention goes, because it's pretty safe to assume that the server isn't going to do anything malicious. Why would you ever assume that? But pretty much, I think the main point the researchers are trying to make is that that should be part of a password manager's threat model, especially given the sensitive nature of what they are protecting, which is quite literally access to your entire digital life, if not more. So this is probably not going to impact you. But I think it's really important to watch how these password manager companies respond. LastPass, no surprise, seemed very dismissive of all of this, which makes no sense given they have already been hit by many of these things. And it's another reason why I'm going to say I'm not impressed with LastPass's general response to any kind of security incident they've ever had to deal with, and I just really struggle to genuinely recommend them as a service as a result of that. Bitwarden seems aware of this, and they're at least responding to this quite transparently, and we'll see if they do more formal responses going forward. As for what you can do, if you use anything like account recovery or key escrow features, that is kind of the highest severity vector, so consider turning those off or disabling them if you're able to, and also be aware that this does impact also vault sharing or group family plans. That's where a lot of this stuff is exploited. If you're just a solo user with no sharing and no account recovery enabled, you are mostly immune to this kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean there aren't other potential avenues that could be exploited if somebody had complete server access, but you are probably a lot safer. Now, while I would argue this isn't a huge concern right now, again, this is still a high bar to exploit. It requires a full server compromise or a malicious insider, not just a typical script kiddie attack. And ideally, if these companies are doing their due diligence, they would be able to recognize that their server has been compromised, so it wouldn't really be a secret. It's also worth mentioning that some of them are actually patching some of these things after responsible disclosure. There is also no known real-world exploitation of these. It is overall just research, but it doesn't mean it can't theoretically happen. So what I would recommend to all of you, I would say, one, don't just abandon your password manager. Even a flawed password manager, I would still argue, beats password reuse by a massive margin. So always make sure to think backwards as well of how far you've come, and then also to look forwards and see if there's any reasonable way to make your workflow better. But don't just assume that the password manager's useless now because of this potential attack avenue. Second, try to disable account recovery if you don't need it. This is probably one of the most important things you can do. Third, be cautious with vault sharing features. Fourth, I guess just have a better understanding of zero knowledge and how it is kind of a marketing term and not something that has an established definition. Fifth, keep your apps updated. A lot of the legacy and backward compatibility attacks only work on older client versions. So if you were keeping yourself up to date, you're probably a bit safer from this. And of course, 6, strong, unique master passwords. Some of these things involved iteration downgrade attacks where they actually take the amount of iterations required to break into your vault with your master password, and they pretty much made the iterations really low. And so if you still have a really long, unique master password, even if they did that attack, you'd probably still be safe. And of course, the elephant in the room. This is a big, told you so moment for people who for years have been saying, I don't trust the cloud with my passwords. I still think that's a pretty high bar to have for yourself, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I still think for a majority of people, cloud-based password managers are overall fine, though I do think there's going to be an overall spectrum of maybe good to bad. With that said, if you want to avoid all of this, I do think using something like KeePass is pretty nice to use. It's serverless. It can just run locally on your system. It's just a database file. You could sync it via your own cloud provider if you wanted to, or you could even use something like SyncThing. So it's just syncing between your devices. You could do it via Nextcloud. You can self-host it. You could also self-host Bitwarden as well via something like VaultWarden. And so definitely consider local options too when possible if you just don't want to think at all about the cloud-based stuff and you have a consistent and easy way to keep track of your passwords across multiple devices. So I know a lot of our audience uses Bitwarden, so I'd be curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are in the comments. I personally use Proton Pass, and I really wish that they did some analysis of Proton Pass as well to see how they performed in this. But based on what the researchers said, my guess, this is pure speculation, is that Proton Pass isn't immune to all of these attacks either. So I am also going to be keeping an eye on this, and hopefully we'll see some responses from various password managers as time goes on. All right, before we talk about Apple rolling out age verification tools worldwide, if you guys are following us on YouTube, you've probably already seen the full dedicated video. But the next story today is about some updates regarding sideloading on Android, aka installing apps outside of the Play Store on Android. Pretty much, if you haven't heard about this, Google came forward and said that the only way to install applications away from the Play Store would be if the developer actually tied their app and all of their stuff to a verified developer account. And this means developers have to complete identity checks, a $25 one-time fee. Otherwise, they literally cannot distribute their applications on a certified Android device away from the Play Store. And it will literally just prevent you from installing the APK outright. This was obviously met with massive backlash, as it really calls into question how open of an ecosystem Android can really be if Google is going to be controlling whether or not you can install APKs on your device. That is almost like if Microsoft came forward and said, we want to control what kind of executable files that we want you to run on your device. Now, as a response to the backlash, Google came forward and said, okay, we hear you guys. We're going to add a built-in exception into the settings. We're going to add this advanced flow where users can still get around it. But they were quite light on the details and they didn't really talk about what this would look like. They kind of just said, yeah, we're going to have a built-in workaround. And so a lot of people said, okay, cool. But there was some kind of internal information from F-Droid. They put out their own blog as well. And in light of that, there is actually an open letter that was published to Google. So there's an open letter that was sent off to them because there is absolutely no evidence that this advanced flow is actually going to exist by the time they actually start rolling out these kind of restrictions on Android starting in September, I believe. I am proud to say that we at Techlore got to sign this letter, and you can actually see on screen and also in the show notes all the people who signed the letter. And so just to be safe, the overall assumption to make is that Google will not be opening up Android in September, and they will continue to lock things down and make everything function a little bit more like iOS, where downloading things away from the official App Store is seen as taboo and not okay. And it's a big fat reminder that these tech companies don't want you to actually own your own devices. They're going to claim that this is a security thing, despite already scanning APKs away from the Play Store with the same malware detection they use from the Play Store. So it's just kind of ridiculous. This is very frustrating. I am quite passionate about this issue, and I'm really tired of Google just not being transparent about what they should actually do here. And I think that users have the right to do what they want to do on their device. If they want to install an app from a different app store, that is a user's choice. It's not Google's decision to prevent people from doing that. They're coming forward and saying that technically that's still available. We just want developers to pay a fee and register through us. But here's the thing. Are you really going to trust Google to sign off on developers like NewPipe, on Revanced, or all these other alternatives to YouTube that they don't like? Do you think Google's going to sign off on more aggressive ad blockers? Do you think they're going to allow those developers to publish applications away from the Play Store? Why does Google get to decide who can publish what away from the App Store that they control? They don't own the entire operating system, but they want you to think that they do. So I find this quite problematic, and I covered it a lot more in a dedicated Techlore video that I'll leave in the show notes as well. So check that out if you want to learn more. I dive a lot deeper into it there. In the meantime, make sure to get active on keepandroidopen.org. I will leave a link to that as well in the show notes. That is the best way to get active and see all the different methods that you can support the cause. And now we migrate to the other big player in the room, which is Apple, who has rolled out age verification tools worldwide to comply with the growing web of child safety laws. Don't worry, because the next story pivots back to Android. So we're just going to flip-flop here between these different companies. But Apple, this isn't super huge news. It has already been, a long time coming. It's been teased. We've already, I think, did some coverage for what this might look like. But it's official as part of the changes with verification laws coming out in the US and abroad. Remember, this is happening in states that are trying to do this inside of the US. Apple is now going to block the downloads of apps rated 18 plus in Brazil, Australia, and Singapore, while also rolling out other features to comply with laws in Utah and Louisiana in the US. Yes, lands of the free they are. The way these work is that they allow developers, so this is not something that you just trust Apple with. You're actually trusting every developer for every app you install on your phone, because these tools allow developers to opt in a user's age range without gaining access to their users' personal information like their date of birth. Now, here's the thing. I actually have overall confidence that this isn't exposing crazy amounts of sensitive information about users. But that is beyond the point. And this is something that I really want to talk about more thoroughly, because several months ago for me, age verification was more about the privacy implications of these tools, which is, oh my gosh, uploading your ID, uploading your face, scanning you with AI, scanning all your messages to see how old you are. These things are clearly privacy invasions, and that shouldn't be happening. But as we actually start to see this roll out, as I actually see these stories, and I start to actually understand, and I've definitely evolved my view on this, that this is not just about privacy. I would argue privacy is actually one of the smaller concerns. It's still valid, but it's not the largest concern for me anymore, because I think you can actually do a lot of this stuff in a privacy respecting way. I think that zero knowledge proofs are a genuine way that we can verify users are either above or below 18 without exposing any other information about the person. But that is not the largest problem. I think the largest problem is the fact that we are now assigning gatekeepers to the internet, which as of right now, are big tech companies. What we're doing right now is we are saying, hey, the internet is a dangerous place. It's got all these problems. Algorithms are out of control. Misinformation is out of control, mostly due to these big big tech companies. So what are we going to do? We are now going to ask those same big tech companies to moderate themselves and start complying with these various laws, which actually entrust them more to keep you safe. And these are historically companies that don't give a damn about your safety. So this is my larger concern. We now are in a situation. It's all about how you present these things. 5 years ago, if someone came to you and said, hey, in 5 years, the government is going to help decide what apps you can and cannot download on the App Store, and Apple is going to comply with those governments and mandate what you can and can't install. I think you would have called them crazy, but that's exactly what this is. It's very fancy language of saying, hey, we are now developing tools that allow Apple, and by extension, any government that wants to use Apple's technology, to pressure them to decide what you can and can't download. So this is just an extension of banning VPNs in Russia, banning VPNs in China, banning social media apps across these repressive regimes. That is exactly what is going to be reinforced when we keep rolling out technologies like this, instead of opening things up and making things more resilient and open. In my view, what needs to happen is Apple needs to stop being the arbiter. They need to open up iOS, just like Google should not be closing down Android and moving the wrong direction. Both of these companies need to be opening up their platforms so that even if they do need to comply, they are not jeopardizing their users' safety because they're still allowing their users to get apps from other locations. This is really serious stuff. I mean, if these companies get it the way they want it, or I might say by extension, the governments, because I think the governments are really the pressure points here. There's not going to be a way to download apps away from official app stores very easily on either of these operating systems. And now you're kind of bound to whatever laws or information they demand from you to see if maybe you qualify to download applications on a device you already own. So yeah, I do ask you all to follow this quite closely and please get involved. And I wanted to throw this story in before we get into the defense bulletin with a lot of updates, because I think it overall speaks to the problem. Google and Apple want to make themselves the arbiter of what apps you can download, and they claim to do this under the guise of keeping you safer online. Meanwhile, Android has mental health apps with 14.7 million installs that are filled with security flaws. These are from the official Google Play Store. They contain security vulnerabilities that could have exposed sensitive medical information. Researchers discovered more than 85 medium and high severity vulnerabilities that could be exploited to compromise users' therapy data and privacy. They found over 1,500 security issues across these different mobile applications. The really ironic thing here is that all of these kind of privacy and security concerns would probably be caught much easier on open source alternatives, which would be on a platform like F-Droid. But F-Droid has come forward and said that they literally will be killed off by Google's new proposed measures to verify developers. And so what these companies are doing is they are shutting off, in some ways, much safer alternatives to their own app stores, alternatives that are meant to be transparent, open, and user first. And so I wanted to just include this story. It is story 3, but it is a good insight into how these app stores that are apparently safer are not perfect tools. They have published malware on these stores as well. So just because something exists on the App Store or the Google Play Store doesn't mean it's perfectly safe. You can still install Facebook, you can still install TikTok, and I'm sorry, I'm quite ranty today because this gets under my nerves, but this is one of my favorite posts that I saw recently. It's from AltStore. If you don't know, AltStore is kind of like F-Droid, but for iOS. So especially in Europe right now, where third-party app stores are reluctantly allowed by Apple with very intense restrictions that I would argue are illegal based on the laws that they have to respect in Europe, AltStore is kind of where you can get open source apps. And I think this really speaks to an interesting point here. So AltStore has this little, I'm trying to describe it here for audio listeners as well. AltStore has this photo, which is like kind of a joking marketing thing because it says avoid CSAM, child sexual abuse material, with a new app from AltStore. It's called the CSAM Store Checker. So all it does is tell you if CSAM material is accessible via apps in this marketplace. And it says for AltStore, no. And it says for the App Store, Apple's App Store, yes. in the X and Grok apps. If you guys haven't heard about this, Elon Musk's Grok AI appears to make child sexual imagery. And this is an established real thing that the platform still hasn't really solved yet. So this is a very personal take section. So you have to remember that these app stores actually pick and choose when to apply their rules. Even if they have established rules that they claim are neutral and apply only to specific developers, there is a long history of them banning people that shouldn't be banned from these platforms, as well as the inverse, which is allowing people to be on platforms despite them literally violating the terms of service. Because what X and Grok did should have got them removed from the App Store. And that is not really an opinion. It's quite verifiable that what Grok was doing actually violated Apple's own terms of service of the App Store, but they didn't remove it. I'm bringing this all up to just, again, make the point that these app stores can comply with whatever they feel is best for them at any point in time. If Apple, stopped X from being downloaded, that would have been a massive problem for them, and they don't want to deal with that kind of issue. But if Apple can block someone that they think is a competitor to them, they're going to do it because they think it's worth it for them and their profits. This is all to say I don't think that we should be putting ourselves in a situation where two companies that are within a few kilometers of each other in their headquarters are deciding all the apps that people in the world should be installing on their devices, as well as the governments who want to control what they're installing. This is a recipe for disaster, and I shouldn't have to explain that. And I thank you all for listening to my rants. Let's now get into the defense bulletin. So the first one is that there's a new air snitch attack that breaks Wi-Fi encryption in homes, offices, and enterprises. This is an extremely thorough and technical attack, and it is in the defense bulletin, so that means that we can't dedicate that much time to it due to time restraints for this podcast, unless you all want 2-hour podcasts, but I already get comments from you that you think it's too long as is, so I'm just going to try to summarize this, and again, you can always check this in the show notes. So pretty much this is a pretty sophisticated but effective attack on Wi-Fi. The really crazy thing here is that it actually gets around encryption by just bypassing it altogether, not breaking it. This works from routers from Netgear, from D-Link, from Ubiquiti, Cisco, and others, including also enterprise gear, which I'm guessing is going to be the main people who are going to be looking at this and seeing ways to prevent it. Now, there is a bit of a catch here, which is an attacker needs to already be on your network or a connected network. So it's still important to acknowledge that strong Wi-Fi passwords remain your first line of defense. And then if you're on a public or shared network, a VPN actually does help, but it's not a complete fix. Patches are already coming from some vendors, though there are just some systemic issues that may require hardware level changes as time goes on. It's very fascinating research, very technical, and I recommend you all check it out in the show notes if you want a full breakdown. Also really quick, but Google has patched its first Chrome 0 day that's been exploited in attacks this year. So make sure you're updating Google Chrome or any Chromium-based browsers like Brave to get those updates. Sorry, if you're in the video, I forgot to move the tab that was being shared. So here you go. You get a pretty photo of what it looks like. All right, this one is pretty juicy. So there is something called the Predator spyware, which hooks into the iOS Springboard to hide the mic and camera activity. So do you guys know I believe this is on Android devices, most of them as well too, where if your mic is activated or your camera is activated, there's a visual indicator of this. So they are able to get around this. They're able to get around this because they actually intercept some kind of function inside of Springboard, and then it prevents the sensor activity updates from ever reaching the UI layer, so the green or red dot never lights up. Apple has not responded to this yet, but I do think it's a good reminder that while, the software-based ones are quite useful and helpful in 99.99% of situations, hardware-based things I think tend to be a little bit more foolproof to me. Like if you're able to physically flip a switch that turns off electricity to your camera, that's always a little bit more foolproof to me than any kind of software indication or software attempt at restricting access to specific things. That's not to say they're useless, but I think there's a spectrum to this. Either way, it's very fascinating, and I think that we hopefully should hear something from Apple about it, if they care to respond, I suppose. There's a new identified cybercrime known as One Campaign, which is enabling threat actors to run malicious Google ads that remain online for extended periods while evading scrutiny from security researchers. I talked about very similar attacks last week, and this is your reminder that these fake ads that show up in Google and other websites that show ads, these aren't just random people who are just doing random things and just a couple users get unlucky. These are like actual established networks, and this is a full business model. And so if you're not using an ad blocker, you are going to be fighting against all these people. If you use an ad blocker, you can simply ignore all of these stories. And that's why I highly recommend using one. If you want to learn more about this specific attack, you can check it out in the show notes, but it's quite similar to the things that we talked about last week. Very quick update from Microsoft. This is just one more Office bug that exposed customers' confidential emails to Copilot AI. This is not the first thing that Copilot's done like this, but they said it has been rolling out a fix for this bug, and they have not actually disclosed how many customers were impacted by it. So I just, in general, recommend avoiding Copilot like the plague until Microsoft decides to actually take their customers' safety and desires seriously. I don't think Microsoft even cares about if their users want Copilot or not. On the topic of ad blockers, from a couple stories ago, AdGuard published a very quick article pretty much saying that YouTube has found a brand new way to bother users of ad blockers. It's quite simple. They are seeing reports that Google has stopped showing comments and video descriptions to users with ad blockers enabled in what appears to be a new turn in the long-running war that dates back to 2023. This is a very back and forth type of deal. It's a systemic problem. And of course, AdGuard, who is an ad blocker, wanted to comment on it. I want to remind everybody that we publish all of our content to PeerTube. It's called Techlore.tv. It's open source. We self-host it ourselves, and we have all of our video content on there. It's ad-free. And so if you guys ever want an easy, accessible way to watch all of this content, you can do that. And also this entire podcast and the Techlore Talks is also posted via RSS. So it should be on every podcast app out there as far as I can tell. And also a plug, one cool thing about ads, one of the only good things is that it is a good way to fund creators and get them some income. And we do actually make money from YouTube ads, but I still have no issue telling you all to block ads, as that is the best and most safe thing that you can do on the internet. And if you do block ads on YouTube, I do ask that you support some of your creators that you enjoy. Doesn't have to be us, it can be anyone else as well. And if you are specifically using our PeerTube server, remember it's not free to host PeerTube. There's no direct monetization model, and we actually spend money each month to have that infrastructure set up for all of you. And so if you like this content and you use PeerTube, definitely consider supporting us and becoming a Techlorian at techlore.tech/support. It's a really helpful way to keep us going. And also you can do one-off tips as well if you don't want to do like a monthly subscription. But there are cool perks for the subscription, like our private Signal group, and you also get to be mentioned in some of our videos as well. So thank you all for your support. And now let's continue. A European DIY chain, Mano Mano, had a data breach that impacted 38 million customers. So if you know of this company and you think you might have been impacted, definitely check out the show notes. There was a data breach at a French bank registry, which impacted 1.2 million accounts. This is the French Ministry of Finance. And so this impacted a lot of people. It included credentials that gave the hackers access to a database with bank account details, account holder identities, physical addresses, and a lot more. And so if you think you were impacted by this, please check out the show notes. A platform called Car Gurus had a data breach that affected 12.5 million accounts. So similar to the other stories, check out the show notes to learn more if you are impacted. This is a crazy one. PayPal disclosed a data breach involving its specifically working capital loan app for small businesses. And so if you had anything to do with this loan, definitely check this out. There was a data breach at fintech firm Figure, which affects 1 million accounts as well. This is apparently a blockchain native financial tech company. So if you use them and you want to learn more, then go check that out. Wynn Resorts has confirmed an employee-specific data breach after an extortion threat. So they stole employee data. And so if you are an employee or have been an employee of Wynn Resorts, definitely go check this out. All right, and then a Mississippi medical center has closed all clinics after a ransomware attack. This was statewide, people. So over 10,000 employees. It's one of the largest employers in Mississippi. It operates 7 hospitals, 35 clinics, and more than 200 telehealth sites statewide. And they had to shut down because of this cyber attack. So these kinds of things can cost lives. And I honestly don't fully understand why attackers think it's cool to attack hospitals and other critical infrastructure. I think there are much easier targets that have a lot less impact on potential life and still may be profitable for them along the way. The Washington Hotel brand in Japan has announced that its servers were compromised in a ransomware attack. And so if you have stayed in this hotel or you're familiar with it, it's worth checking out the details. Okay, and now the update section. We're almost done for the week. And so this one, I couldn't actually find a primary source. I just discovered this by myself. But on Signal for Desktop, I updated it, I believe last night, and it mentioned that their new end-to-end encrypted backups feature is now part of Signal Desktop. So if you are a Signal Desktop user, you should be able to do their end-to-end encrypted backups there. Firefox 148 is now available with the new AI controls and AI kill switches. And so if you are someone who wants to experiment with AI in your browser, you can just leave it on. Or if you don't want any AI in your browser, period, Firefox now has a very clear option to disable it. It's not just for deciding whether or not you like AI, though. There actually are real improvements here as well, which include Firefox for Android, which supports Trusted Types API, CSS shape function support, Sanitizer API support, web GPU enhancements, and many other changes. Tor browser version 15.0.7 is now available. It just includes pretty much security updates and some other minor improvements. This one's quite exciting. Tuda released email on your terms with schedule send. So now you can do that schedule send feature where you send something and then you realize you made a mistake and you undo send. So that now is available in Tuda. So if you are a Tuda customer, go check out that feature and enjoy it. On this note, Tuda Mail and Tuda Calendar are now available as a Thunderbird add-on inside of the Thunderbird email client. And so that should make things a little bit easier because it's just apparently one click according to their blog article here. Nextcloud Hub 26 Winter adds a migration tool, browser encryption, and Office updates. If you want to get the full breakdown, they do a really good job in their blog article breaking it down, which I'll leave linked in the show notes. But my favorite feature is the ability to do like per file / per folder, I believe, even encryption. And so you don't have to enable full end-to-end encryption and you can just protect specific files. This one was quite fascinating. Entei, who's behind Entei Photos and Entei Auth, has now released Entei Locker. And it's a very fascinating product. Pretty much it's like a simplified version of saving just important things in your life, like documents, notes, passwords, and more. You organize them into collections, you share them with links, and you can set up trusted contacts. I think that this is meant to be kind of a way to bring together just basic information. Like, you know, if you have a family, you might have medical records, insurance policies, and it's the things they put here on the screen, identity cards, passwords, and notes for emergencies. So I could see this being used of like, oh, like emergency backup in, you know, for the whole family. So the whole family has access to a folder with things like identification or maybe like what to do in a crisis, medical records, etc. And I think I see the use case here. I'd have to think about it because nothing like this really exists, but I feel like there are genuine use cases here, and I think it's a pretty interesting pivot for Entei. So I'm excited to try this out. F-Droid OS, which is an open source smartwatch operating system, which I still haven't tested yet, and I really want to, but they released version 2.0, which has always on display, a nightstand mode, and performance improvements. So if you use F-Droid OS, I'm sure you've already updated because you are quite excited for this, but if you haven't, now is a good time to try it out. KDE Plasma 6.6 has added a virtual keyboard, spectacle text recognition, and improved accessibility. So if you use that DE, get yourself updated. Okay, this one is quite unexpected. I can't really, maybe guess how many times I've covered and we covered when Nate was on the podcast positive Samsung news. But I thought this was actually sick as hell. So the Galaxy S26 has a new privacy display. You know, the privacy screen protectors that I've recommended, that many people recommend in the space. Pretty much it stops people in public from, shoulder snooping and just looking across your shoulder and seeing what you're doing. The cool thing about this is that it gives you the same exact functionality as a privacy screen protector, but you can literally turn it on or off. There are two sets of pixels on a display, one that projects the image straight ahead towards the viewer and one that projects light off to the sides. So you can see a screen from the angle. So you can actually just straight up turn off that second set of pixels and the screen looks normal to the person holding the phone while looking dim from an angle. So it's built into the freaking phone. So I am not going to go out and say, yeah, this is probably a good phone to have just for this exact feature, but I really hope other manufacturers install this feature because I think privacy screen protectors are quite effective, but they are kind of annoying from a usability perspective at times. This is awesome. I have nothing but positive things to say about this. Genuinely an innovative feature for hardware on a smartphone, which I feel like I can't say I've said in a long time. Really quick signal boost from the EFF. They are just saying again that VPN bans are a bad idea, and they're specifically referring to a couple states, and we've done coverage for this on Techlore, so if you want to check out a little bit more about these VPN bans, I did a dedicated video on this some months ago, so check that out, and I'll leave that video in the show notes for you to learn more, as well as, of course, the EFF update here on why this is a bad idea. Okay, this is a big signal boost. I feel like this petition really hasn't made the rounds. Someone, I believe, sent this through our a community feedback form, and it's pretty much a petition to not ban children from using virtual private networks in the UK. The UK is trying to KYC VPNs and make VPNs log activity about their users. And so there is this petition out there right now that has 4,700 signatures, and they need 10,000 for the government to respond. Ideally, though, they need 100,000 to actually be considered a debate. Now, I do know consistently we get around 15,000 people who listen to this. So if you are in the UK and you listen to this, I think we can genuinely get at least several hundred signatures on this. And if all of you can share it with other people in the UK, you can make a big difference. So please, if you're in the UK, spread this around, spread the word. I didn't know about this until one of you let me know about it. So thank you for letting me know. But I think there's probably a lot of people who, could sign this that don't know about it yet. Finally, I did want to shout out Cake Wallet. Version 6.0 is coming out soon, which is going to include Bitcoin Lightning and also a pretty big redesign. So I'm excited to try that out. When I was working at Cake, I got to see a lot of the redesign. And so it's kind of fun to be on the other end of it now and kind of wait to see it actually release as a user again. So I'm really excited to see it because I really enjoyed what I saw back then. And that is all I have for this week's surveillance report. If this analysis helped you reclaim control, you can become a Techlorian by visiting the link in the show notes. You'll gain access to our exclusive communities, you'll get key perks, you'll get our Signal group, all while keeping this podcast growing and available to the public so all of us can get the news. Please, if you can, also take a moment to leave a rating, share the episode to spread digital freedom, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, or wherever. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Surveillance Report in a couple weeks from now. So I'll see you all soon.